There was a lawyer once. His name was Francis Scott Key. He penned a song that I'm sure you're aware of. You've seen it. It's in most hymnals throughout our churches. It's called the National Anthem. It is our song as an American. We go, however, to a ball game. We stand in our church services and we sing the words of that song, and they float over our minds and our lips, and we don't even realize what we're singing. Most of us have memorized it as a child, but we've never really thought about what it means. Let me tell you a story. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer in Baltimore. The colonies were engaged in vicious conflict with the mother country, Britain. Because of this conflict and the protractedness of it, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. The American colonies had prisoners and the British had prisoners. And the American government initiated a move. They went to the British and they said, let us negotiate for the release of these prisoners. They said, we want to send a man out to discuss this with you. They were holding the American prisoners in boats about 1,000 yards offshore. And they said, we want to send a man by the name of Francis Scott Key. He will come out and negotiate to see if we can make a mutual exchange. On the appointed day, in a rowboat, he went out to this boat and he negotiated with the British officials. And they reached a conclusion that men could be exchanged on a one-for-one basis. Francis Scott Key, jubilant with the fact that he'd been successful, went down below in the boats, and what he found was a cargo hold full of humanity, men. And he said, men, I've got news for you tonight. You're free. He said, tonight I have negotiated successfully your return to the colonies. He said, you'll be taken out of this boat, out of this filth, out of your chains. As he went back up on board to arrange for their passage to the shore, the admiral came and he said, we have a slight problem. He said, we will still honor our commitment to release these men, but it'll be merely academic after tonight. It won't matter. And Francis Scott Key said, what do you mean? He said, well, Mr. Key, he said, tonight we have laid an ultimatum upon the colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down the colors of that flag that you think so much of, or you see that fort right over there, Fort Henry? He said, we're going to remove it from the face of the earth. He said, how are you going to do that? He said, if you will, scan the horizon of the sea. And as he looked, he could see hundreds of little dots. And he said, that's the entire British war fleet. He said, all of the gunpowder, all of the armament is being called upon to demolish that fort. It will be here within striking distance in a matter of about 2.5 hours. He said, the war is over. These men would be free anyway. He said, you can't shell that fort. He said, that's a large fort. He said, it's full of women and children. He says, it's predominantly not a military fort. He said, don't worry about it. They said, we've left them a way out. And he said, what's that? He said, do you see that flag way up on the rampart? He said, we have told them that if they will lower that flag, the shelling will stop immediately. And we'll know that they've surrendered, and you'll now be under British rule. Francis Scott Key went down below and told the men what was about to happen. And they said, how many ships? He said, hundreds. The ships got closer. Francis Scott Key went back up on top and he said, men, I'll shout down to you what's going on as we watch. As twilight began to fall, and as the haze hung over the ocean as it does at sunset, suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. He says the sound was deafening. There were so many guns that there were no reliefs. He said it was absolutely impossible to talk or hear. He said suddenly the sky, although dark, was suddenly lit. And he says from down below, all he could hear the men, the prisoners, saying was, tell us where the flag is. What have they done with the flag? Is the flag still flying over the rampart? Tell us. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling. Every time the bomb would explode and it would be close to the flag, they could see the flag in the illuminated red glare of that bomb. And Francis Scott Key would report down to the men below, it's still up. It's not down. The admiral came and he said, "Your people are insane." He said, "What's the matter with them?" He said, "Don't they understand this is an impossible situation?" Francis Scott Key said he remembered what George Washington had said. He said, "The thing that sets the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is he will die on his feet before he'll live on his knees." The admiral said, "We have now instructed all of the guns to focus on the rampart to take that flag down." He said, "We don't understand something. Our reconnaissance tells us that that flag has been hit directly again and again and again, and yet it's still flying. We don't understand that." But he said, "Now we're about to bring every gun for the next 3 hours to bear on that point." Francis Scott Key said the barrage was unmerciful. All that he could hear was the men down below praying. The prayer, "God, keep that flag flying where we last saw it." Sunrise came. He said there was a heavy mist hanging over the land, but the rampart was tall enough. There stood the flag, completely nondescript, in shreds. The flagpole itself was at a crazy angle, but the flag was still at the top. Francis Scott Key went aboard and immediately went into Fort Henry to see what had happened. And what he'd found had happened was that that flagpole and that flag had suffered repetitious direct hits. And when it had fallen, but men, fathers, who knew what it meant for that flag to be on the ground, although knowing that all of the British guns were trained on it, walked over and held it up humanly until they died. Their bodies were removed and others took their place. Francis Scott Key said what held that flagpole in place at that unusual angle were patriots' bodies. He penned the song, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Or the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that the flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet fly and wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" The debt was demanded. The price, it was paid.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets break clear, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say Spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Aloha and welcome to Trust and Verify. We got an excellent show planned for you tonight. If there's a dry eye on the house right now, I doubt it. But before we get to that great show, let me introduce my friend, my partner, my co-host, the man down under, Boogie Bumper. Boogie, how's it going?
Good, James. Happy birthday, America. Happy early birthday. I didn't get you anything though. I think we have that relationship now where, like, if I kind of like, what do you get the country that's already got everything? You've got riots, you've got porous borders, you've got $20 trillion in debt, and you've got a lot of angry people wearing black masks. I couldn't think of any. Maybe a gift certificate to Sears, perhaps. I don't know if that is Sears still around, by the way. I'm not sure.
Only some of them. Only some of them.
Only some of them. So we'll get you a nice Sears gift certificate. We'll put that in the mail, and you can have at it. But it's good to see everyone in the chat, guys. Thanks for joining us once again Sunday night on this special birthday edition for America, James. And thanks for having me, because technically I'm still part of the colonial empire, you see. So this,
Yes.
You've been labeled many things in the past, James. We can now add on to that. Apparently you're a traitor because you're talking to the enemy, especially on Independence Day. That's a big faux pas, I would have thought, speaking with one of the Queen's representatives. But, maybe we'll let it slide just this one.
We officially adopted you as an American, so that we're all together here. So you have like the unofficial status as an ambassador between the two nations. So it's okay. See, that's how we get around that little loophole.
I'm sorry. What's that? Yes, Your Majesty. Yes, they bought it. Yes, I mean, I've successfully infiltrated the rebels. I'm in. Yes, Your Majesty.
I'm in. Just a couple centuries too late.
Yep. Pat the corgis for me. What do we got tonight?
Well, apparently we've got a lot to talk about, but we had to start it off, in my opinion, with this is our 4th of July episode. We won't see it till after 4th of July, but we wanted to provide a little fireworks, a little patriotism to start the show off with. So, what do you say we start maybe with what did you want? You want to start with Rod Rosenstein and then and show the patriots why patriotism's so important?
Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts. I missed a lot of the Rosenstein testimony, so we'll queue up a little video here, and we'll have a little discussion, a to and fro. Once again, guys, if you want to share, jump on Twitter. There should be at TAV Show on the Twitter, at TAV Show. One of the tweets there will be a link to this. So if you want to share that out, please do. Thank you, patriots. And yes, I will keep the Queen at bay for the duration of this broadcast.
Thank you. Let the record show that the witnesses answered in the affirmative.
Russia isn't being hurt by this investigation right now. We are. We've seen the bias. We need to see the evidence. If you have evidence of wrongdoing by any member of the Trump campaign, present it to the damn grand jury. If you have evidence that this president acted inappropriately, present it to the American people. There's an old saying that justice delayed is justice denied. Whatever you got, finish it the hell up, because this country is being torn apart. I would yield back, Mr. Chair.
With regard to the investigation, I've heard suggestions that we should just close the investigation. I think the best thing we can do is finish it appropriately and reach a conclusion. And I certainly agree with you, sir. People should not jump to conclusions without seeing the evidence. I've been the victim of fake news attacks myself, so I'm sympathetic. I agree with you, sir, that there's been no allegation made by the Department of Justice or the special counsel other than what's reflected in those documents that are filed publicly, the charged folks.
Am I correct that each of you were appointed by President Trump? Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. This report, the special counsel has gone on for a long time. Could that be because there is so much information and so many issues that have arisen from his investigation that it's impossible to just turn it off? Is that possible, Ms. Rosenstein?
I do not think you should draw any inference. I don't think, as these sort of investigations go, that it's actually been going on for a long time. And I can assure you, Director Mueller understands that I want him to conclude it as expeditiously as possible, consistent with his responsibility to do it right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rosenstein, why are you keeping information from Congress? I think in a few minutes, the House of Representatives is going to go on record saying you haven't complied with requests from a separate and equal branch of government, that you haven't complied with subpoenas, and you got 7 days to get your act together. I think that's what's going to happen in a few. And that's not Jim Jordan. I think that's the House. I think that's a majority of the House of Representatives. In just a few minutes, I think that's going to happen. And I want to know why you won't give us what we've asked for.
Sir, I certainly hope that your colleagues are not under that impression. That is not accurate, sir. And
it is accurate. We have caught you hiding
Mr.
information.
Chairman, can we allow the witness to
Rosenstein.
answer? Mr. Chairman, point of order. We can go to Mr. Jordan's press conference and listen to him, but we came here to hear from the witness.
The time belongs to the gentleman.
Mr. Rosenstein,
Can we allow him to answer?
we have caught you hiding information.
Allow him to answer.
He will be permitted to
I answer
answer
that,
when
Mr.
Mr. Jordan.
Why do we have them here?
We'll allow him
They're not
additional
allowed
time to answer.
Why are they not allowed to answer?
The gentleman's out of order. The gentleman from.
I've heard you make those sort of allegations publicly on TV.
I got
And if
I
you
got it
let me
right here.
respond, sir.
Mr. Chairman, he should be given
Right
the
here.
opportunity.
Now, Mr.
to
Jordan,
answer.
I'm responsible for responding to your concerns as I have. I have a team with me, sir. It's just a fraction of the team that's doing this work. And whenever you brought issues to my attention, I have taken appropriate steps to remedy them. So your statement that I'm personally keeping information from you, trying to conceal information.
You're the boss, Mr.
is not
Rosenstein.
true. That's correct. And my job is to make sure that we respond to your concerns. We have, sir. Now, I've appointed Mr. Lausch, who is managing that production. And my understanding is it's actually going very well, sir. I appreciate your concerns.
Again, I think the House of Representatives is going to say otherwise.
But your use of this to attack me personally.
Why did you?
is
It's not
deeply
wrong.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. May the witness be permitted
It's not.
to answer the
It's not personal. I appreciate your.
Okay, just a couple of thoughts out of that, James. Number one, for me, and this might make me a few enemies, I'm not sure, but I'm a big fan of Jim Jordan. I actually think he's like a rising star in the Republican Party, and I think he could almost, he's almost got presidential material on him in maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 cycles, 3 cycles or thereabouts. But I found that exchange cringeworthy. I didn't like it. I thought he lost his cool, and I thought he lost his advantage, because he's looked like he's been coming from a position of strength throughout this whole thing as the guy who puts the pressure on, puts the boot in the throat. And I thought just in that moment, it looked like he'd lost his cool and he was throwing away that advantage. What do you think?
Theater. I think we're watching Shakespeare in action. I think that there are so many little things, like these little tiny data points that just keep adding up to where we are watching a crafting of a battle between the two sides. You're watching a forced exchange to try to drive home the narrative. I said this before on my own scopes. There's people, all the co-hosts at YVA have pointed out things like this, is that if you look at what's the outcome, like you always have to look from a results orientation. Where is this headed? And so I think Rod Rosenstein is playing this game just as much as I think everybody else on the other side is. If you look at what the actual outcome of the event was, the left, the Democrats, spent a whole day defending the Trump administration, and they don't even necessarily realize it. Every time they're defending Rosenstein and they're defending Wray, they're defending the president's picks. They're defending people that work for the Trump administration. Now, when our investigations start popping and they start coming out, they politically and don't really have a play to reverse course and to suddenly be on the other side of that. So it comes down to this theory that we have that this is all theater, that at the end of the game, we're going to see that the people that are supposed to be going to jail are going to jail. And some of them include members of Congress. And this is why you see Congress putting up such a fight. Here's the other ultimate angle is everybody thinks that impeachment means firing. Let me explain the Constitution one more time, is that that's not the mechanism. Okay. They can't do anything. In Jim Jordan's own words, exposed it again. He said, separate but equal. What does that mean? What is equality? It means that they can't tell Rod Rosenstein what to do because he's a member of the administration. He is an appointed political member of the administration. They can't fire him. They have no power. The Constitution is clear. The only hammer that Congress holds over the administration is funding, because they're responsible for the purse strings. So the only thing they can do is defund the Department of Justice or defund the FBI or defund any branch of government. They literally have no hammer here. They can impeach all they want. Let's look at Bill Clinton, for example, and what happens when someone gets impeached. That's right. He was impeached and never removed from power because it's a constitutional crisis. How do you remove a member of the administration?
By one vote, wasn't he? One vote in the Senate kept him in.
Yeah, right. They didn't want to go down that road because there's nothing that can be done. Nothing. It's all theater. It's all play acting. I know people aren't going to like that. I know that in some people's minds, I want to be clear about this because this is a touchy subject, what I'm about to say, because of Q. Okay? Q has said Rod Rosenstein is basically no good. Essentially, that's the sales narrative on the Rod Rosenstein stuff. Apparently, remember, Q doesn't say things specifically too much. But if you look at the narrative all the way along the way and what everybody's been supposing, what everybody's been thinking, remember one other key point that I have said and that Q has said, that disinformation is necessary to protect patriots, that disinformation is going to be widespread, that even our side is going to be guilty of disinformation to protect the investigations, to protect people. So at the end of this, when you see Rod Rosenstein acting in a way that we didn't get to it. It wasn't in that short subject there, but Rod Rosenstein basically gave the cat away when he said he cannot comment on ongoing investigations. And it was over people in the administration's previous administration. It was over who's basically in trouble. And he basically admitted under that fire, under that pressure, that the people in Congress are under investigation. And nobody wants to talk about that. The media is definitely not covering it.
Let's see if we get something out of this then, James. From the Hill, just earlier today. Don't know what that happened. Earlier today, Rosenstein conflicts undermine legitimacy of Mueller investigation, which is actually pretty surprising to come from the Hill. But let's just see if we get anything. This is only a little 30-second clip. Let's see if this is what you're talking about.
Department of Justice, we're accustomed to criticism, and it does not affect our work.
As I've said repeatedly, I am committed to doing this job by the book in all respects, and there's no amount of political pressure that's going to dissuade me from that by either side.
Okay, that didn't tell us anything, did it? In his recent testimony to Congress, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein undoubtedly intended to sound reassuring. I am quite confident, he proclaimed, about my conduct throughout this investigation. Rosenstein may have reason to feel confident. He's in a difficult position and his conduct may indeed be above board. And under normal circumstances, Congress and the public might be comforted by his guarantee. But here's the rub. These circumstances are far from normal. We're in the midst of one of the most important scandals in memory. Our intel agencies and some public officials within them are suspected of abusing power and misusing sensitive tools under their control as political weapons. The allegations reach far beyond the 2016 campaign and transcend into party politics, which makes them all the more insidious in nature. That was basically my point, pardon me, during the Ray response, James, that press conference, in that, you know, the very nature of this investigation means that it's not just simply a case of like lining up drug dealers and arresting people, because it's so tangled, right? Just even the investigation itself, even if nobody is found guilty, the very nature of who you're investigating and for what makes it a very, very difficult thing for guys like Rosenstein and Ray to come in front of Congress and then give answers. Like, what's your theory about what Jim Jordan was talking about there about not getting papers to Congress? And that's been running for nearly 12 months now, if not longer, that they've been requesting these documents. What's your theory about these particular documents and why they haven't shown up yet? Is it along those lines, or is it something else?
It's part of the investigation. Investigations take a long time, and prosecutions take even longer. And so I think those documents will let some rats scurry to the hills, and that's what they're trying to avoid. I will guarantee you right now, because of the precipice our country is on, the president will declassify every single document necessary to get the entire country to re-understand what was going on at the end, to be able to look back.
That's a big call.
Yeah,
that's a big call. Yeah, this is incident number 6 of you risking your punditry career in about 3 weeks. So, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll put it all on the line because I know I trust the president and I trust what he knows, and I can see what it's going to take in order for everyone to trust our government again. The only way for American people to trust the government ever again, even with the president, let's put it this way, if everybody gets arrested, goes to prison even, but we never find out why, nobody's still going to trust the government. So the only way for the government to be trusted again is for pure transparency to the nth degree, to the most amount possible, without actually putting our country in a very bad position. So again, it's not going to be 100%. Anyone who expects that is part of the problem, because you cannot, there's just things there that reasonable people understand cannot be exposed. You could not put the country in a position to completely melt down. So even though you may want it, even though you may like it, you have to accept that there's a certain level. But because we trust the president, and only the president, he will have to disseminate the documents in order for us to see for ourselves, to be able to go back and trust our government. And I think he'll do that, because his goal is not to destroy America. His goal is to restore America. And so that's part of the restoration. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen at the end.
This isn't like weeding out corruption in some 2-bit third world dictatorship, because you're talking about the most powerful nation on earth. So if you bring, like, see, one of the reasons why the world functions as it does is because regardless of changing of governments, right, historically in America, you've always had a certain level of stability. And around the rest of the world, they understand that, you know, governments change, and, you know, people get elected and then they get kicked out, and employees change. But what always has to be maintained is stability overall, right? Even though there are, you know, fluctuations within the system itself. And a lot of world confidence, whether it be in markets, militarily, trade, is based on that stability. So if that stability is then under fire and that falls apart, then the repercussions from that are felt like across the world as we know it. And, you know, I know a lot, you know, you want justice, right? But there has to be a way to do it without threatening the stability of the American system itself. Because if you do, you may be totally unprepared. Like, you might make something 10 times worse, if that makes any sense. I want to know what you've thought about this, James. This is the New York Times, by the way. Shaken Rosenstein felt used by White House in Comey firing. In the days after the FBI Director James Comey was fired last year, the Deputy Attorney General Roger Rosenstein, I'm going to pronounce it different every single time I say it, I've decided, repeatedly expressed anger about how the White House used him to rationalize the firing, saying the experience damaged his reputation, according to 4 people familiar with his outbursts. In public, Mr. Rosenstein has shown no hint that he had second thoughts about his role, writing a memo that Mr. Comey's performance at the White House used to justify firing him. Quote, "I wrote it, I believe it, I stand by it," Mr. Rosenstein said to Congress last year. Was he used, James? Is he being used? Is he
Yes.
Is he a guy that you push out there to say the right things, or what?
Well, I don't
Let's go
think
for
it's
number
that.
7.
I don't think it's that extreme, but yes, in politics, everybody's being used. I mean, that's just a fact of life. Everybody is being used to what their value brings. So is he being used? Yes, but not in those explicit type of terms. It would be more like, that's his job. That's what he was there for. That's the opinion he was, asked of to give. He gave it, and then action was taken on it. It's the same thing that's going to happen up and down the government. He had a choice. He had a free will. Nobody forced him. He wasn't under gunfire. I mean, that's what he did, and he's clearly in his own words said he stands by it.
Ain't nobody got a gun to your head, huh? Ain't nobody got a gun to your head.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, he was used, but that's the way of the world. Especially that's the way of Washington. And everybody knows it. We're not shrinking violets, and we're not children. This is the game. Is that you're going to be held accountable for the things you say and do when you're in a position of power, and that's exactly what just happened.
Okay, let me throw this up for you then, James, and see if this helps you. This is from a Sydney paper, which is well known for being so far on the left that buses don't go there. This was shared by someone on Twitter just a little bit earlier, Steph, I think. Like it or not, Trump is a man of his word. Let me get that back up. Donald Trump continues to break conventions, whereas typical politicians fail to honor their election pledges. This US president keeps his word. For all the spin and flip-flopping of modern politics, here's a bloke who practices what he preaches. That's how you can tell it's an Australian paper, by the way. We actually use the word bloke in our paper. The list is long, growing. He pulled the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Pact, and the Iran nuclear deal. He will move permanently the U.S. embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. He has slashed the U.S. company tax rates and stacked the judiciary with qualified conservatives. He has put a travel ban that restricted entry to America from several Muslim nations, which the Supreme Court upheld this week. On July 16, Trump will broker détente with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. One can oppose Trump on these issues and much else and still recognize his positions were advertised in the 2016 preview guide. But hatred of Trump runs so deep in some circles that many people cannot see straight. Even Trump's diplomatic outreach towards Kim Jong-un was flagged on the campaign trail in May 2016. He suggested that as president, he would welcome direct negotiations with the North Korean dictator. The response from left to right was hostile, appeasement, weak, naive, delusional. All these barbs were hurled at the foreign policy novice, yet, James, success it was, at least in the short term. Although there has been a little bit, would you call it fake, a little bit of fake news, James, flying around about North Korea. I don't know if you want to get sidetracked too early, but, this is the thing. I've made this point before. Even if you're just talking about Donald Trump's mannerisms, there's the problem here is I think that, see, even if you don't like somebody, you can understand why people like them, right? As a general rule. You don't have to like, I don't have to like James R. to know why he is liked, because you can work these things out. Now, the problem with the visceral hatred of Donald Trump, and they'll say that he brings it on himself, but I'm not necessarily sure because it's the same things that they hate which other people like. Right? His mannerisms, his way of speaking, which is very casual, but they can't understand why people like him. And I think that fuels a lot of the hatred. And when you line up those election promises that are kept, I mean, that's got to be a record in modern politics. Even if he only gets 3 of those, he's setting records for the amount of promises kept. I think it was Nigel Farage late last year, James, who said, Donald Trump will go down in history as the first modern president to ever keep his election promises, and he's hated for it. Right? So, you know, I want to get into the protests and stuff, but generally speaking, then, do you think if we're talking about drain the swamp, is that going to be the election promise, even though it's a bit vague and a bit ambiguous? Is that the election promise that we're seeing play out, in your opinion, when we talk about Rosenstein and Comey and Christopher Wray?
100%. In fact, I often have argued that the way to understand Donald Trump's actions is to apply the drain the swamp filter. If you can't understand why Trump did something, ask yourself, how does this help drain the swamp? If you do that, you usually, I'd say 99% of the time, you'll see for yourself the path of why he did what he did, because it will end up draining the swamp. It will conclude at the point where the swamp is being drained. For example, why is Donald Trump talking about the fact that they need to get, basically what he said without saying it is, we need to get rid of government unions because it's the reason is we can't fire bad people. So when you look at that and then you see things that come out about them trying to basically the Supreme Court stood up for the fact that unions cannot be no longer take employees' money when they're not a part of the union, and they can't apply that and force them to pay that money. Right? You start to see that we're breaking the back of the union. So why is Donald Trump not trying to stand up for the union? Because he needs the union in government employees to get the heck out of the way so that they quit this supporting people or promoting people that absolutely are horrendous at their jobs and are part of the deep state swamp. So just applying that filter alone lets you see the path of how drain the swamp filters shows you that that's the correct moves. And that's why they're doing things that they're doing. Why are they combining the Department of Education with the Department of Labor? Is it specifically because of the statements they made? No. How does that help drain the swamp? Because it gets the Department of Education out of the indoctrination programs that they've been in, and it'll return education back to a state level, and it'll allow actual people to not be forced and trapped into this ideology and going into college and going into, $200,000 in debt before they get a job on the other end that has nothing to do with their degree. Because I don't know about you, but I have yet to find a job that would require me to have a degree in gender studies.
Are you sure motor mechanic, James? Can I get a job as a motor mechanic with a degree in gender studies? Maybe not. Maybe one day. Maybe if progress really takes hold. Maybe if we eliminate gender stereotypes, then finally I'll be able to get a job in structural engineering with my gender studies degree. One day, let's hope so anyway, because progress really needs to get into those STEM fields. Kim Jong-un, the world's most friendliest dictator, James, in the chat room says he also understands the reason those hate him is because they're either evil or being duped by those who are. Absolutely. So there you go. There's a lot of he's simultaneously the most loved and the most hated president, James, and it couldn't be more exemplified in the goings on over the last 48 hours with stuff like this. Pardon me. U.S. migrant separation protests draw tens of thousands to march against Trump laws, James. You know those Trump laws?
Yeah.
I think he just drew them on the back of like Comey memo style. That's law now. I guess he really is a dictator. Tens of thousands of protesters across America, moved by accounts of children separated from their parents at the US-Mexico border, have marched in major cities and tiny towns to demand President Donald Trump's administration reunite the divided families. More than 700 marches drew tens of thousands of people across the country from immigrant-friendly cities like Los Angeles and New York. Immigrant-friendly. I like that. So if you're not in Los Angeles or New York, you must be anti-immigrant. We're immigrant haters here in this part of the world. We're not immigrant-friendly like those New Yorkers. To conservative Appalachia and Wyoming under the banner Families Belong Together. Isn't that lovely? There's Save the Children signs there. Now, here's an interesting little line for you. Pardon me. In New York City, thousands began chanting shame and singing shut detention down before their planned march against the Brooklyn Bridge. Though many who show up to the rallies, James, across the country were seasoned anti-Trump demonstrators. Don't you love that? So you've got to have a bit of experience. Yeah. No, this is my 10th rally this year. I feel like we're really making a difference. I think when we get up to protest march number 15 and 16, we're really going to see some impact. Like he's really going to change his mind and stop being such a Hitler. So, I got a bit of experience when it comes to this marching malarkey. Others were new to immigration activism, including parents who said they felt compelled to show up after heart-wrenching accounts of children forcibly taken from their families as they crossed the border illegally. In Portland, Oregon, for example, several stay-at-home mums organised their first rally while caring for the young kids. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? So we'll go to our first rally, take the young'uns, get them involved, get them a notch on the belt, James. Yes, my 4-year-old son is at his 5th rally, you'll be pleased to know. We're very progressive. I'm not a radical and I'm not an activist, said Kate Sharaf, a Portland co-organizer. I just reached a point where I felt I had to do more. As far as I'm concerned, this is a national emergency and we all need to be focused on right now. James, are the Democrats desperately seeking election issues here? Am I being too cynical? Because it seems to me the Supreme Court nomination, which apparently is going to tear the Constitution apart, he hasn't even nominated anyone yet. So you add that, you add these protest marches. Am I wrong in saying about 6 months ago we knew that it was what was going to be called the Summer of Rage? Is that right?
Right.
Remember the Summer of Rage from the left-wing organizations? We also know the caravan that got people to the border in the first place was also organized by some pseudo-political activist groups, was it not? And they said, it's going to be a summer of rage. We're going to be marching in the streets. It looks to me like they're trying desperately to win, to try and find an election issue because everything else they've done in the previous 2 years has failed dismally. What do you think?
Yeah, what they're trying to do here is they're trying to force Donald Trump to elect someone that they like. What they're trying to do is set the world on fire to the point where, it looks like, half the country is in arms over what he's going to do. And so if they can back that false optics, back that up with some false polling, then they can sell to Donald Trump that he needs to put in this sort of, middle of the road, wishy-washy Supreme Court justice. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to create that false narrative. And it's,
consensus pick.
Yeah, it's the same stuff with the consensus pick stuff. They don't understand the game that we're really playing here is we win. That's the game we're playing. Hashtag we win. So they played their game for 8 years of destroying America at every single level, all throughout the government. We're going to spend the next 8 years not only repairing the damage they did, since you see we've done most of that work in 18 months. Now we're going to spend the next 6.5 years going back beyond the Carter administration to an America that should exist. The one that should have existed had the left and the right establishment people not got together and decided that they hated the American people. We're going to enslave them all. They're all going to be less than us. And we're going to destroy this elitist mentality. That's the game we're playing. Drain the swamp is at many levels. Destroying the elites is the top of the list. Those are the people, these people with this elitist mentality that think that they have the rights that, like you talked about before. I think you've said it right more than anyone, is that when the right gets their way, when the right plays hashtag we win, everybody is free to continue to protest and to continue acting like idiots. When the left wins, people like you and me are drug out of our house in the middle of the night and shot in the head. That's the big difference. Right. That's why we're playing hashtag we win.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can't have a tolerant and harmonious society unless we first eliminate all the people who are going to question that tolerance and harmony now, can we? All right. Yeah. James, do you think civility is overrated? Is civility and is civility some kind of antiquated, archaic notion which is really has no place in a modern, tolerant, progressive society like the ones we're trying to build, comrade? Or am I looking at this a bit too cynically? Let me just throw this up for you. And I did a request from Cheryl. I think it was yes, it was Cheryl. She wanted to know what Maxine Waters thought about this. So I've just got Maxine on the phone. Just give me 1 sec. I'll just put her on the speaker.
You form groups and you tell them they're not welcome here. You form groups and you push back against them. You push back against them in the supermarkets, in the gas stations, and you tell them they're not welcome here. You're not welcome here anymore.
Thank you, Maxine. Thanks for dropping in.
I want to know why Maxine developed an Asian accent.
Well, she's very multicultural. She's living in LA. I mean, come on, don't be racist. White America's age-old misguided obsession with civility, James. White America. Just the white people. These silly white people and their civility. I actually heard an interview today. I forget who the lady was, and I forget what network it was on. I was just listening in the car, and she said, it's racist for people to have a problem with what Maxine Waters is saying in regards to civility, because all that represents is a whole bunch of white people who can't handle the truth. I thought, oh, that was fantastic. I thought that was wonderful. You can't. But then I thought, well, is she not culturally appropriating Jack Nicholson at that point? You can't handle the truth.
You're not welcome here.
Recent disruptive protests, James, from diners at Mexican restaurants in the capital calling for the White House advisor Stephen Miller a fascist, to protesters in Pittsburgh blocking rush hour traffic after a police shooting of an unarmed team have provoked bipartisan alarm. The CNN commentator David Gergen compared the anti-Trump resistance unfavorably to the 1960s protests, saying, quote, the anti-war movement in Vietnam, the civil rights movement in the 60s and early 70s, both of these were more civil in tone. Even the anti-war movement was more civil in tone. But certainly the civil rights movement among the people who were protesting. But those who say that the civil rights movement prevailed because of civil dialogue misunderstand protest and political change. The New York Times is going to set you straight. The misunderstanding is widespread. Democratic leaders have lashed out, James, at an epidemic of uncivil behavior in their own ranks. Senator Charles Schumer described the harassment of political opponents as not American. His alternative, polite debate. If you disagree with someone or something, stand up, make your voice heard, explain why you think they're wrong and why you're right. He forgot corner them in restaurants and push them out by force, though. So he's not very progressive. The theme, we need a little more love, a little more Martin Luther King, a dollop of Gandhi. Be polite, be civil, present arguments thoughtfully and reasonably, appeal to people's better angels. Take the high moral ground. Yeah, what happened to that? When they go low, we go high. Now it's like when they go low, we form a gang and chase them out of a gas station. Like, I didn't see that one coming, right? The sugarcoating of protest has a long history. During the last major skirmish in the civility wars 2 decades ago, when President Bill Clinton held a national conversation about race to dampen tempers about welfare reform, affirmative action, and a controversial crime bill, the Yale law professor Stephen Carter argued that King, quote, understood that uncivil dialogue serves no democratic function. But in fact, civil rights leaders, while they did believe in the power of nonviolence, knew that their success depended on disruption and coercion as much, sometimes more, than on dialogue and persuasion. So just coerce and disrupt and you'll get what you want. They knew that the vast majority of whites who were indifferent or openly hostile to the demands of civil rights would not be moved by appeals to the American creed or to bromides about liberty and justice for all. Polite words would not, James, change their behavior. I see what they're getting at, and I understand, you know, if you want to struggle for something, then you have to struggle for it. But again, I'm not sure, would you say, malnourished young upper middle class boys wearing black masks who, when they get pushed back, then scream to the police, assault! He assaulted me, officer! You're not welcome here! I'm not sure that that's going to win the optics, because I think we're at the stage now where even their own supporters, like if Chuck Schumer's coming out and saying, you know what, this isn't working for us, maybe they should listen to him. Right? I think they know that they're losing voters hand over fist, because I tell you, I see a lot of Democrats who hate this stuff. They absolutely hate it. They think it's petty and stupid, and they hate the fact that there's other Democrats out there, Democrat leaders, And like I said, these malnourished children with serious vitamin B deficiencies getting around there spraying mace in women's faces and stuff, they're actually hurting their cause. They're making them look unreasonable and they don't like it. You know what I mean? So I just don't see how this is a winning strategy. And unless, though, when you go to the next logical step, is the winning strategy simply to just create violence for the sake of violence? Like, are you trying to get what you want, or is what you want to create the violence in the first place, right?
Yeah, I think that first, let me start with, we didn't see the article you were reading on screen. So where was the sourcing for that? It was the New York Times. Okay.
New York Times.
I just wanted to make sure we covered the sourcing just so that people knew we weren't just reading whatever we wrote to each other. The point here is actually to incite violence. I've called this out last week, maybe even longer than that, is that, you know, what the left wants is exactly what we see on YouTube yesterday and today is them getting knocked out. They want that optic because they want to be able to say, see, look, the violence is on both sides, when we know that that's not what's really going on. If they would have never showed up, this would have never happened. Now, I'm definitely someone that says defend yourself. I'm definitely saying stand up for yourself. Absolutely. But I would say don't go to a place where you know violence is likely to occur because they're staging the rally. Now, this happens to be the opposite, whereas some people on the right set up and staged the rally and the left showed up to create that exact scenario. So they want that optic out there. But for the most part, civility is exactly what the right gives you. The right is too civil in many ways, and that's why we got here. It was our parents and our grandparents' generations attempting to be civil and saying, fine, you guys have been screaming about this climate change, we'll give you a little. Well, guess what? They took that little that our grandparents gave them and they ran with it to the nth degree, and that's how you get this out of control climate change nonsense that almost destroyed the world. I mean, this is like history. It proves that it's exactly like, for example, the migrant invasion, right? They're taking advantage of our generosity of spirit. They're taking advantage of the fact that our own faith says turn the other cheek. They're saying that they're taking advantage of the fact that we want to be helpful and reach out and take care of our neighbors. And they use that against us. That's what the left and evil has been so good at, is using our own faith against us. We have got to be back on top of things. And that's what you see going on, I think, in my opinion, is you see people standing up for the rights of ourselves for once.
Yeah, James, I don't know. I'm going to have to push back on you a little bit there. I think you're unfairly characterizing this quote unquote violence. I mean, it's not really violence, is it? A couple of pee bottles thrown over, a couple of bags of human feces, the odd baton, the odd bike lock, the odd spray in the face with a bit of mace. I mean, it's really not that bad, is it? Check out this. Just, you know, huge all-female brawl breaks out at San Francisco Pride Parade after one woman was asked if Kehlani was still singing and got a rude response, James. More than a dozen women were involved in a brutal brawl. There they go, the lovely ladies going at it, showing what tolerance is all about. More than a dozen women were involved in a brutal brawl at the San Francisco Pride Festival after an argument broke out over a singer's performance. The senseless violence was caught. I don't know if it's senseless. Who's to be the judge of that, really? You know, you've got to defend the honor of these singers, James. It's important stuff. Which was caught on video by a horrified onlooker, reportedly began when one woman asked another if singer Kehlani was still on stage. She replied very rudely, quote, and called her a bitch. Witness claimed, kicking off 7 minutes of savage fighting during the Sunday event. Now, I put it to you, if at a rainbow-laden pride parade, an argument over a singer's performance can result in this level of violence, James, wouldn't you say that with literally Donald Adolf Hitler in power, ripping children apart, destroying the Constitution, throwing the world into chaos and turmoil, I think they're really being quite reserved and polite. I think they are being very civil. If this is the benchmark, and I think you're incredibly, you know, naive and rude and somewhat of a right-wing conspiracy theorist to suggest otherwise. Let's be honest. Good on them. Good on the Pride Paraders. Well done. Well done. Setting the benchmark once again.
That is amazing right there, that they are literally fighting. And I love the terminology that the horrified onlooker filmed it. Yeah, how horrified did that filmmaker look? Like they were pushing through to get front row seating. Like, I mean, come on.
Right in close.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I was horrified, I wouldn't be filming it. I was more like laughing my ass off filming it. But yeah.
How about a little bit of fake news, James?
Absolutely. Always up for some fake news.
Okay, let's do this. I saw this one circulating a little bit. Let's let this clip run. It's only 90 seconds.
Intelligence insiders ringing alarm bells this weekend amid new concerns about North Korea, specifically Kim Jong-un's commitments to President Trump at their Singapore summit last month. Citing new evidence.
You knew this was only a matter of time. I suspect this will be the running theme. Every time, there's some kind of question mark or a bit of misinformation or somebody doesn't get their I's dotted and their T's crossed, they're all going to come out en masse and say, oh, he's backing out of the deal. We told you. We told you he's backing out of the deal. Donald Trump's an idiot. He got played.
That the regime's been working to conceal key aspects of its nuclear program. Intel officials say this undermines their pledge to surrender their nuclear stockpiles, what was supposed to be the first step in the process of denuclearization. But the National Security Advisor insists.
Sorry, I just feel the need to add this in for effect.
Mr. Trump, Mr. Kim Jong-un, what do you think about Stormy Daniels, sir?
Okay, there you go. It's doing my Jimmy Costa.
And the administration is naive when it comes to Kim's intentions.
We are using the full range of our capabilities to understand what North Korea is doing. We've seen how the North Koreans have behaved before. The president's been very clear. He's not going to make the mistakes of prior administrations. We're going to pursue this, and we'll see what happens.
The newly revealed evidence allegedly indicates that Pyongyang is covering up the existence of at least one uranium enrichment facility, where it produces fissile material for nuclear bombs. This comes on the heels of the Trump-Kim summit, after which the president had tweeted, there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea. But President Trump's holding firm.
I really believe North Korea has a tremendous future. I got along really well with Chairman Kim. We had a great chemistry.
But do we believe him, Mr. President?
I love how he says he had a great chemistry with Kim, because that just triggers people immensely. It just
shook hands with him. I really believe he means it.
Other senior Trump administration officials have towed a more cautious line in recent weeks than the president. Secretary of Defense Mike Pompeo telling the Senate Intelligence Committee this week that the threat from North Korea has been reduced rather than eliminated. John?
Okay, James, talk to people off the ledge. What do you think about all that? Fake news, or
100%
was Donald Trump being treated like an idiot once again?
100% fake news. Let me first address the chat room real quick, guys. Hey, welcome to the troll. You guys have to understand what the troll account is for. That's for people that come through the website right now. So if they join by tavshow.com, it'll say it's a troll account because they haven't established an account. So that's why you can't look at their account, because they don't have one. It's basically they're not logged in, they're not signed in. It's not a big deal. If they start acting like idiots, Kim Jong-un will nuke them. So, having said that, this is all fake. This is all a theater again. Is that Harold Finch, who many of you out there in Twitter land know, is that he is the former account of Name Redacted, and he also set up the fact that this is a fake story that was rehashed from an article written months ago in 30 North. So you can go to the Harold Finch account, you can go to my account, you can find that story. This is all rehashed nonsense and based on lies. We know this. Why? Because we know that if the Intel people were going to be leaking stories to the media, they would have leaked the fact that we were already negotiating with Kim Jong-un months before anybody found out about it. So since there was no leaks on that, what in the world makes me think that suddenly there is a leak that is occurring today that goes against the president? No, it's not happening. It's all fake news. This is how they do this stuff. Is what they do is, this is the bad thing about the way journalism has become. One person writes a story and then everybody else re-says the same story. It doesn't matter. Because they legally back themselves up by saying, well, we didn't say it. Susie over here said it. So it's a line of It's just bad. Okay, I almost swore there, but I'm gonna try to stop swearing on my periscopes. It's just bad. Is that these guys are full of crap and deliberately trying to sabotage. Think about this. They're deliberately trying to sabotage a nuclear disarmament agreement. Just on the surface alone, if I were in the media, I wouldn't be talking about it. I would wait to see what the hell happened. Why would you want to insert yourself into a negotiation? Why would you want to insert yourself into a position where you could affect the outcome of a disagreement, or I'm sorry, of a disarmament agreement?
James, I know why you'd want to insert yourself into something like that, because you want to end up on the hammering on TAV show.
It's time. It's time for the hammering. Here we go, folks.
Stop the hammering.
Now, this is an exercise in projection you are not likely to forget anytime soon. Jim Acosta, one of my personal favorites, James, with one of my other personal favorites, Wolf Blitzer, explaining why fake news and calling the media the enemy is really, really, really dangerous stuff. Let's roll.
The president, meanwhile, he's speaking out about the newspaper shooting, calling the killing of those 5 journalists horrific and horrible. Let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta.
What do you got first, Jim?
Jim, what else is the president saying?
Well, President Trump changed his tone on the media today, at least for the moment, saying journalists should not be subject to violent attacks after the...
Straight away off the bat, right? Like, I don't know why anybody would come at Jim Acosta and say you're being a bit of a, this is a bit of a victim complex. This is a little bit naive, because he's like, well, the president changed his tone from recent rhetoric by coming out today and saying that journalists shouldn't be slayed to death in their offices. Like, yeah, because I'm sure that's what right? I'm not laughing at the dead journalists. I'm laughing at Jim Acosta because this is so stupid. But carry on, Jim.
Mash in Annapolis. That is a major shift for the president, who has repeatedly called the press the enemy of the people, despite concern.
Yeah, he's repeatedly called the press the enemy of the people. Jim, he has not called for people to shoot journalists. That is one step too far. But of course, this is CNN. So let's roll.
Concerns from journalists that his rhetoric creates a dangerous climate.
His rhetoric.
For a president who routinely demonizes the media, it was a significant moment. One day after the mass shooting at the Capital Gazette newspaper in Annapolis.
Look how low these people go. So now wasn't the story behind this shooter, James? Didn't he have a long-running dispute with the newspaper? Tried to take them to court in about 2011, 2012, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. Absolutely. So this is, you put images up of the memorials, right, the flowers, and then you play clips of Donald Trump saying the press is the enemy, and guess what you're trying to do? It's an association meme, right? So Donald Trump caused this shooting without actually saying that Donald Trump caused the shooting. Right. I can't imagine why anybody doesn't trust CNN. Can you?
This attack shocked the conscience of our nation and filled our hearts with grief. Journalists, like all Americans, should be free from the fear of being violently attacked while doing their job.
But as the president left the room, he would not specify whether this is only a pause in his battle against...
Look how far back he is.
Mr. President, calling us the enemy of the people, sir.
No, you are the enemy of the people.
It's just incredible, isn't it? Like, this is the thing I think most people find enraging about this stuff. There's just no mea culpa. It's just constantly, always. There's never a moment where they step back and say, okay, maybe we shouldn't report it this way. Like, maybe we shouldn't try to link a shooting at a newspaper with what Donald Trump says about fake news. But that moment never comes up. That moment of clarity never arrives. And it's just breathtaking because you just keep rolling and rolling and rolling, and the ratings keep going and going and going until you find yourself a veteran journalist standing at the back of a crowded room yelling out questions to people who obviously can't hear you and wouldn't answer anyway. It's like, bravo. Well done. What journalism, what expertise. That career trajectory is going like right out into the stratosphere. Well,
they take no responsibility. No responsibility.
No, none at all. None at all.
Clearly rendered speechless, declined to answer the question from CNN's Abby Phillip.
Is it time for the president to stop calling journalists the enemy of the people?
The president says.
Back, guys.
Thank you very much.
Back.
Thank you.
Look at all those fake newsers back there. Look at all. That's a lot.
It's a critical question for the White House, as the
No, it's
president has repeatedly labeled the press the enemy of the people from early on in his administration.
A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people.
To just this week.
You know, the enemy of the people, I call them.
As we found at his rally on Monday, his supporters are often swept up in the moment.
See, did you see these lines, James? The condescension. As we found out at the rally, his supporters are often swept up in the moment.
Yeah,
Like, see, none of these people had any before Donald Trump said so, right?
But I want to highlight who the arrogant and enemy of the people here is. The supporter that's so extremely violent is like a 95-year-old grandma holding up a handwritten sign telling Jim to go home. I mean, look at everybody else is fine. It's one old lady. This is what they have to point to. This is how insane CNN and Jim Acosta is they actually felt it irrelevant news to highlight that Jim was being basically hit with a purse over the head, you know, saying, where's the beef? You know, it's like that Wendy's commercial. You know, it was hilarious. Like, this is what they think is a highlight of how violently extreme the Trump supporters are. 95-year-old women
Absolutely.
with purses.
James, don't be sexist now. I think you know that 95-year-old women can be Nazis too, okay? Get out of here, Jim.
There are endless examples of the president's preference for extreme rhetoric. Look. From a tweet showing
Oh, God, I didn't expect that. Holy shit, that's funny.
Endless examples of Donald Trump's extreme rhetoric, James. Yes, a skit on a professional wrestling show. That's where we're stooping to. Remember, we're trying to link the actual real-life shooting of journalists to a meme which comes from something that is literally fake, and everybody knows it. Incredible stuff. Oh, the destructive rhetoric never ends, James. And you know what Donald Trump's going to do? He's going to come out next week during someone else's bout. He's going to hit someone in the eyeballs, then hit them over the head with a chair, and then he's going to walk off with the belt above his head. And he's going to say, any place, anytime, I'll fight you in a cage, Jim Acosta. We'll fight in a cage. And then he's going to start chanting USA, USA, USA. And then unmasked lucha libre wrestler who's probably an illegal immigrant will jump off the cage and hit Donald Trump in the back of the head with a frying pan. That's my prediction.
And reporter to his remarks during the campaign.
Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Mr. Trump has boasted there are no consequences for his actions.
Here we go.
I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
Gunman's actions in Annapolis and any of the rhetoric coming out of Washington. Still, Trump supporter Sean Hannity quickly blamed Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
I've been saying now for days that something horrible is going to happen because of the rhetoric. Really, Maxine, you want people to call your friends, get in their faces.
I don't see any blaming of the shooting on Maxine Waters in that little clip. Well, you know what? It doesn't matter. Let's just keep rolling. I mean, you know, we're talking about professional wrestling memes here.
The renewed questions about the president's rhetoric comes as Mr. Trump appears to be searching for a replacement for Chief of Staff John Kelly.
Some people think
sources tell CNN the president recently touched on the subject with Budget Director Mick Mulvaney over dinner this week.
Right.
The president may have other staffing concerns to consider after aides patched through an apparent prank call to Air Force One earlier this week.
I see. So prank calls, looking for a replacement for General Kelly. This is why he's out there hyping up violent rhetoric, James, which actually causes deaths at newspapers. Can you piece that together? Can you keep up out there? Please keep up. Shooting at a newspaper equals Donald Trump's violent rhetoric equals wrestling meme tweeted out equals looking for replacement for General Kelly equals prank call on Air Force One.
That caller pretended to be New Jersey Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, who was recently cleared
actually
of
pretty
corruption
good.
charges in federal
This is
court.
like the king of prank calls.
Great job. You went through a tough situation,
and I don't think a very fair situation, but congratulations. Obviously, my constituents are giving me a lot of beans about this immigration thing. Let me just tell you, I want to be able to take care of the situation. I'd like to do the larger solution, and I think we could do a real immigration bill.
What they're not telling you in this little report is they actually had to translate that from Russian, which is actually Donald Trump's native tongue. CNN.
Now, CNN has learned staffers for Menendez say they were contacted by the White House yesterday asking about the call, apparently unaware that it was a prank. The White House not commenting, as far as we know, in the last hour or so about how all of this developed. But
they haven't commented in the last hour. That means everything's true.
Senator Menendez has released a statement saying, as someone who has spent my entire career, this is the senator here, trying to convince Republicans to join me in reforming our nation's broken immigration system. I welcome any opportunity to have a real conversation with the president on how to uphold the American values that have guided our family-based.
No, we can't have conversations. As we've discovered from the New York Times, civility is overrated. What we need to be doing is tweeting out wrestling memes, I think. Is that real? Yeah.
Immigration policy for the last century. And Wolf, we should point out...
See, James, civility is overrated when it comes to fighting for political change, unless, of course, you're talking about the kind of civility that involves tweeting out wrestling memes. Then that's actually violent rhetoric, which can literally cause, James, violent old ladies to approach you with handwritten signs and cheerfully say, "Get out of here, Jim." Oh, no. Shoot anybody, please, ma'am, please. Put the sign away.
There's also something that is sparking a statement just now from the White
House.
Settle down. To point out, we were getting a statement just now from the White House.
Surprised you didn't hand him cupcakes.
This is from a White House official. Apparently, this person did not want to be named. And the quote goes this way, Wolf. The president wants to be accessible to members and likes engaging them and wants them to have the opportunity to connect. The downside of that is that sometimes the channels are open too widely and mistakes like this happen. So, Wolf, a very interesting comment here from a White House official just in the last several minutes.
Oh, no, the president's too accessible.
They don't acknowledge mistakes over here very often.
Which side of this do they want to sell?
I don't know. I'm doing my best to keep up.
Frank phone call or a comedian was able to talk to the president on Air Force.
How horrible.
Raises all kinds of security concerns. So somebody.
Oh, no. See, when a prank phone call from a comedian can get through to Air Force One, that raises security concerns. When members of the intelligence community leak classified phone calls between other world leaders, hey, that's just the free press. That's just the free press.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Which side of this do they want to sell? They sell that Donald Trump doesn't want to talk to Democrats, doesn't work with Democrats, doesn't want to come to an agreement with Democrats, and then they highlight the fact that because he's trying to talk to a Democrat, the Democrats put a comedian on the phone, and now it's World War III. What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on? I can tell you what's going on, James. We need to be more civil, unless we want to be less civil when we're going against Donald Trump. If anybody tweets a wrestling meme, it will cause little old lady Nazis to approach you, and make sure you're not hacking. Because remember, once upon a time, the media used to be respected for being like the hard-nosed guys who go after the truth. Now they are just the angry kids who stand at the back of a crowded room and claim they're being oppressed because the person can't hear them yelling out.
That's the salient point here, is that Jim Acosta was scared of a 95-year-old lady armed with a sign.
Correct.
Stop the hammering.
Folks, that's all the time we got for you tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I hope you have a fantastic 4th of July weekend. For me, for Boogie, you can follow me at Real Person Politics. You can follow him at Boogie Bumper. You can follow us at Tav Show, and visit us all at tavshow.com, where you will find all your favorite broadcasters. Aloha. Everyone have a great night.